we've got the motor pulled out on our project FD, and we're going to go over our engine bay and do a typical breakdown of what we're looking for before we drop the motor back in. Basic maintenance and basic measures to make sure you're prepared to do a proper install. This particular FD RX7 is actually an automatic car, so we're doing a manual transmission conversion. I've already got my manual transmission mocked up in here. It's connected to the power plant frame, and I've got the front bell housing supported by the floor jack, so we're approximating our engine height, so it helps with our alignment of the clutch and the motor as we're putting it in. You're also going to need to change your pedal assembly, but there isn't any big differences between your FD automatic and your FD manual transmission chassis. It is a swappable car. If you're deciding to do a manual transmission conversion from an automatic, you're going to need to address a few things. All right, on this rebuild, we reused our existing eccentric shaft, so it's still got a used pilot bearing and seal in there, and I'm going to use my Mazda factory pilot bearing seal removal tool to pop those out. If you're using a new eccentric shaft in your rebuild, it should come with a new seal and bearing, but you definitely want to check this and always make sure you've got some good grease down there on the bearing. A couple taps of the slide hammer should pop it out. There you go. We decided to go with a lightweight flywheel, and if you notice, it's actually a smaller disc size. So we've moved our weight more towards the center, so that's going to help our rotating speed. If you look at the disc itself, it's a metallic disc with springs, so we're going to have a good amount of friction area locking up. This should be able to hold a fair amount of horsepower, but we've also got these springs in there, so via the pedal for the driver, it still should be a nice streetable, usable clutch. With our friction surfaces wiped off, we're now going to put the first disc down. Make sure you're not touching the actual friction surfaces. You don't want to get any fingerprints or oil or residue on there. Nice and clean. Here's our first floating disc that's going in. This is the other running surface for the twin disc setup. Same thing, we want to wipe it off with acetone or some type of non-residue leaving cleaner. For installation, we're just dropping it down in, aligning our blue marks. The blue line is actually indicating the balance of your flywheel from the factory to the clutch setup. Installing our second disc down onto that first floater plate. Now that we've got our second disc on here, we've actually got two different splines we need to line up, so EXEDY provides a little alignment tool. We want to make sure we get that down in there and get both discs aligned. Final wipe off on our last floating disc. I'm going to drop that on, line up the blue line, make sure everything's still nice and lined up. All right, so we're getting our motor squared up in the engine bay so we can lower it down in and clamp the motor and transmission together. Once we've got the motor and transmission bolted together, we'll then be able to lower them down together into those motor mount pockets. As we're lowering our motor down in, we want to be careful to not hit the back of the clutch on the input shaft. With this build, we're pretty fortunate. All of our turbos, our exhaust, our power steering, ABS is all out of the car right now, and some of it's being deleted. So depending on the level of the build or how close to OEM you are, there may be components that are still in your way. Some of those components are gonna be in your way. Take your time, use bungee cords, do what you need to strap things to the chassis or frame rails so it makes it easier to lower your motor down in. With our motor and transmission snugged up together, we can now lower our floor jack out from underneath the transmission and start to lower the whole motor and transmission down into our motor mount pockets. Floor jack's out of the way. Now our whole motor and transmission is suspended. All right, I'm going to lower the motor down into those pockets, and then we can adjust our motor mounts to drop into their actual holes. There we go. There we go. With a little bit of a pry, obviously being careful, we can get those motor mounts to just drop down into those pockets. Alongside our twin turbos, we've got this nice CX Racing lower intake manifold. It's got larger runners and 6 injector ports along that secondary rail, giving us a home for those 2000cc injectors we got from Evolved Injection. We're going to be running ethanol in this setup, so we wanted to make sure we had ample air and fuel delivery so we could achieve our horsepower goals.